Welcome to the silent horror. Eli stood at the edge of the rooftop, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared into the cold abyss below. The world had shattered around him. He could feel the weight of his decisions, the lives lost, the promises broken, and the ghosts that now haunted him, stalking his every step. The figure on the roof wasn't just a monster. It was a mirror, reflecting every fear, every doubt, every mistake he had ever made. He thought back to the life he had before this nightmare, when the world was simple, when the worst thing he feared was failing at work or letting down his family. But now, he would give anything to go back to those moments, to the mundane struggles that felt insignificant compared to the darkness that had consumed them. And then Sarah's voice, faint but desperate, broke through his thoughts. "We need you, Eli. You can't give up." He closed his eyes. How could he go on when every choice seemed to lead them closer to the edge? How could he protect them when the very thing hunting them was the darkness inside him? "I can't," he whispered to the night, his words lost in the wind. But deep down he knew he wasn't just running from the monsters outside. He was running from himself. Eli sat in the dim glow of the SUV's dashboard light, fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the cracked radio. The static screeched through the air like an animal in pain, tearing at his nerves. The only thing he could hear over the noise was his own heartbeat, thudding in his chest, a desperate, throbbing rhythm that refused to quiet. It had been hours since they left the shelter. Days, maybe, since they last saw anything resembling life. The world outside had become a wasteland. Eli didn't know why he kept trying. Maybe he hoped for some miracle, a voice, a signal, a sign that the world hadn't completely turned to ash. But deep down he knew. The truth was, every time the radio crackled, every time it offered a brief, fleeting whisper sound, it only reminded him how utterly alone they were. "Anything?" Sarah asked from the passenger seat. Her voice was faint, distant, as if the weight of the world had pressed her into silence. Her eyes were fixed ahead, staring into the dark expanse of road that stretched out before them like an endless void. There was no light, no sign of life. Just shadows. Eli didn't immediately respond. His hand hovered above the dial, his fingers tracing the worn edges. He glanced over at Sarah, his gaze lingering on her face. There was something about her, something not quite right. She had been quiet ever since they left the shelter. Too quiet. Her face had grown pale, her eyes sunken, and though she still held her ground, she seemed to be sinking into herself. Eli didn't know if she was losing faith or the pressure of the world was simply wearing her down. "I'll let you know when I find something," he finally muttered, his voice low and heavy with exhaustion. The radio static had become a constant presence, like a specter hanging over their every thought. Sarah didn't respond. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, fingers twitching slightly, as though her mind was elsewhere. It was a look Eli had come to know well. The look of someone who was no longer entirely present. She was losing herself in the silence, losing herself to the same madness that had already claimed so many others. Behind him, Mark and Catherine sat in the back, whispering to each other in low tones. Eli couldn't make out their words, but their hushed conversations made him uneasy. He didn't know if it was just paranoia or if it was something deeper, the sense that something was unraveling between them, between all of them. He could feel the tension like an electric current buzzing just below the surface. "Maybe we should head back." Mark's voice broke the silence, sharp and biting. "It's been 3 days, Eli. 3 days without a sign of anything. We're wasting gas, wasting time." "No," Eli replied, his voice firm. He didn't look at him. "We keep going, if there's a chance." "There's no chance," Mark interrupted, his voice growing louder. "Look around you, Eli. It's over. The world is gone. People are gone. We're just surviving until we're not." His words hit Eli like a slap to the face. It wasn't the first time Mark had said something like that, but the coldness in his voice, sharp, almost venomous, sent a shiver down Eli's spine. Sarah's gaze flicked toward Mark in the rearview mirror. She said nothing, but her face was tight, like she was holding her breath. "Maybe we should listen to him." Catherine's voice came next, barely above a whisper. She had been quieter than usual, withdrawn. It was like the constant presence of fear was slowly smothering whatever spark of life remained in her. She shifted in the seat, her eyes darting toward the darkness outside. "We don't know what's out there," Eli said. His words fell hollow even as they left his mouth. But he clung to them like a lifeline. There could be others. Survivors. We can't just... "We're not safe," Mark said again, cut him off. "We're not safe anywhere. You know that, right? Those things. They're not like the movies. They're not mindless." His voice dropped, and for a moment, Eli could have sworn there was fear in it. Real, raw fear. "Stop it," Eli snapped, his voice rising. He could feel the cold weight of panic closing in on him. "They're not like the movies, but they're still people. They're still human." Mark's eyes darkened. "Are they? Eli, what are you even trying to say? You can't save them. You're not their savior. They'll twist you into something you can't even recognize. They remember. They remember everything." There was again the haunting truth that had been gnawing at Eli's mind. The infected, those half-zombies, the ones who still held on to bits and pieces of their humanity, were worse than the mindless horrors they had imagined. They remembered their names, their loved ones, the things they'd done wrong. They could talk, sometimes. They could beg. And that made them infinitely more dangerous. "Shut up, Mark," Sarah suddenly said, her voice sharp. It was the first time she had spoken up in hours, and Eli turned to glance at her, surprised by the edge in her tone. "We're not here to fight. We're here to survive." The words hung in the air like a fragile truce. But even as Sarah spoke them, Eli could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the air had thickened, grown more suffocating. He wondered how long it would be before they all started turning on each other. How long before the fear turned into something darker, something more dangerous. The radio crackled again, cutting through the silence. For a moment, Eli froze, heart hammering in his chest. He didn't dare move. Then the voice came through, weak but unmistakable. "Help, please, anyone. Can hear us?" Eli's breath caught in his throat. He leaned forward, frantically twisting the dial, trying to find the source. "Who is this? Who is... We're at the old hospital on 5th. Please, if you're out there, we need help." The voice was a whisper now, fading with each word. But it was there, a sign, a glimmer of hope. "I heard it," Eli said, his voice shaking. "We have to go. Now." "No," Mark said quickly, his face grim. "We don't know what's waiting for us." "I don't care," Eli shot back, turning to Sarah, who met his gaze in the rear-view mirror. "We can't leave them." "Eli," Mark's voice was sharp warning, but it was Sarah who spoke next, her words soft but firm. "I'll drive," she said. Eli didn't argue. He couldn't. The road ahead was uncertain, but the voice on the radio, that fragile cry for help, was all they had. And despite everything, despite the terror and the paranoia, Eli wasn't ready to give up on it. Not yet. But as they pulled back onto the road, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. And it wasn't just the infected. The night swallowed the world whole. Only the headlights of the SUV pierced the endless blackness, illuminating the road ahead in harsh, artificial light. The further they traveled, the heavier the air seemed to grow, thick with tension and the unspoken weight of fear. Sarah's grip on the steering wheel was tight, her knuckles white. Her gaze was fixed straight ahead, but Eli could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the hesitation. She hadn't said a word since the radio transmission, but Eli could feel her unease, her unwillingness to admit what they were all thinking. What if it's a trap? Eli sat in the passenger seat, his hands folded tightly in his lap, heart hammering. His mind raced with fragments of thoughts, none of them coherent, all of them too loud. What if the voice was someone trying to lure them out? What if it was one of those things, pretending to be human? He turned toward the back seat, where Mark and Catherine sat, their faces dimly illuminated by the fading glow of the dashboard. Catherine was staring out the window, her eyes wide and unblinking, watching the darkness like it held some answer she didn't want to find. Mark, on the other hand, was shifting in his seat, glancing at Eli and Sarah in quick, jerky movements. His face was tense, his jaw tight as though he were chewing on something he couldn't spit out. "We're getting close," Sarah muttered, though it didn't sound like she was trying to reassure them. The words just hung there, like they were as much for herself as they were for the others. "How close?" Mark asked, his voice tight. Sarah didn't answer immediately, but her eyes flicked to the map on the passenger seat. She traced the lines with her finger, then gave a shallow nod. "A few more miles, maybe 10. "Good," Mark said, his voice flat. "Let's just get this over with." The words felt wrong in the silence, a jarring note in a fragile symphony. Eli glanced over at Mark, but Mark wasn't looking at him. He was staring out the window now, eyes narrowed, as if he were expecting something to jump out of the shadows. Paranoia. Eli could feel in the air like a sickness spreading through the car. He had seen the way Mark had been acting ever since they left the shelter. The way his eyes darted at the slightest sound. The way his hands gripped his gun a little too tightly, a little too often. Eli shifted in his seat, unease crawling up his spine. He opened his mouth to speak, but didn't know what to say. He didn't have answers anymore, not like he used to. There were too many unknowns, too many questions without answers. Catherine broke the silence, her voice small and shaking. "Do you think they're still human?" She turned to Sarah, her wide eyes searching the older woman's face. "The ones we're going to find at the hospital, are they still people?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Eli felt his stomach churn, his breath catching in his throat. He could already feel the answer, though it wasn't what anyone wanted to hear. Sarah swallowed, glancing in the rear-view mirror at Catherine's wide-eyed stare. "Some of them, maybe," she said quietly. "Some might still have memories. But—" She trailed off, her words hanging on the edge of something unspoken. Something they all knew, but none of them wanted to admit. "Some might still have a soul," Mark chimed in bitterly, his voice cold. "But the rest? They're just monsters pretending to be people. And when you see them, when you hear them scream, begging for mercy, you'll wish they were just monsters." Eli winced at his words. He didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to remember the twisted screams they had heard in the early days, before they learned to stop listening, before they understood that to have zombies, the ones who still had memories, still had emotions, could feel when you hurt them, could feel when they failed, could feel the same guilt they had before they died. The SUV rumbled over a pothole, jolting them all, and Eli's stomach lurched with it. His hand clenched around the door handle, knuckles whitening. The idea of walking into the hospital now, into the unknown, felt like a death sentence. Mark's voice cut through his thoughts. "It's not the infected we need to worry about anymore. It's us. It's the ones who are still here. Still human." Eli shot a glance at him, meeting Mark's dark eyes in the rear-view mirror. The weight of his words pressed down on Eli's chest. What did he mean by that? He couldn't help but feel the flicker of suspicion creeping into his thoughts. Suddenly, Catherine gasped, her hand shooting up to her mouth in shock. Eli whipped around, but before he could ask what was wrong, Catherine's voice trembled out. "There's someone there." Everyone froze. For a moment, the car's engine seemed to grow louder in the silence, the hum of it filling the air like an impending storm. "What?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. "Back there," Catherine whispered, pointing toward the rearview mirror. A figure, in the dark. Eli twisted around in his seat, his heart thudding in his chest. The road behind them was empty, swallowed by shadows, just like it had been for hours. He couldn't see anything. Nothing. "Catherine, you're seeing things," Mark muttered, voice tight. But Eli noticed the way Mark's grip on his rifle tightened, the way his eyes darted to the rear-view mirror, searching for something that wasn't there. "I saw it too," Catherine said, her voice shaking now. "It was there, standing at the side of the road. It looked like a person." Eli felt his skin prickle with unease. Was she imagining it, or was there someone alive, out there in the darkness? Was it possible? Sarah's voice was flat, strained. "We're not stopping." But Catherine began to protest, her voice rising. "We're not stopping," Sarah repeated, cutting her off. Her foot pressed down on the accelerator, pushing the SUV faster. The tires screamed as they gained speed, the engine roaring louder in the stillness. Eli turned back toward the window, his mind racing, But his stomach had dropped. What had Catherine seen? Was it someone or something following him? The road ahead stretched on, endless. The fear that had settled in his chest had grown, spreading like a cold knot in his stomach. But now, it was more than just fear of the infected. It was something darker, something between the four of them. And whatever it was starting to break through. The miles dragged on. The road seemed endless, as though the very ground beneath them had forgotten where it had once ended. Sarah kept her foot on the accelerator, her eyes fixed straight ahead, the dim glow from the dashboard illuminating her furrowed brow. Her knuckles gripped the wheel so tight that her fingers had turned white, and yet her face remained unreadable, like a mask she wore to hide what she was really thinking. Eli's heart beat in his throat, a constant, ragged pulse that had become as much a part of the journey as the road itself. His eyes flickered from Sarah to the rear-view mirror, then back to the road ahead. Nothing. No sign of the figure Catherine had claimed to see. But still, the image lingered in his mind, refusing to let go. "I'm not crazy," Catherine had said earlier, her voice small but defiant, as if trying to convince herself more than anyone else. "I saw it. There was someone back there." Eli had tried to calm her, tried to assure her that they were just all on edge, that the darkness played tricks on your mind when you've been awake for too long. But deep down, a part of him, the part he didn't want to admit to, had started to wonder, what if it wasn't just her mind playing tricks? What if there was someone out there? Someone still alive? Or something else entirely? For a moment, the memory of the figure, the outline of a person standing in the dark, barely visible, crept back into Eli's mind. His stomach churned. No, he refused to let himself fall into that paranoia. Not now. Not when they were this close. "Sarah, you okay?" Eli asked, his voice soft but pointed. It felt wrong not to speak, as if the silence would crush them if they didn't fill it with words. She didn't respond right away, her focus unbroken. Then, after a moment that stretched on too long, she answered, "I'm fine." Eli glanced at her, but her expression didn't change. There was a strain to her voice, an undercurrent of something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was something more complicated. The strain between them was growing thicker by the hour, and it felt like it was suffocating the air they breathed. Mark, still quiet in the back seat, shifted uncomfortably. The air was thick with tension. So thick it was like they were all holding their breath, waiting for something to snap. Eli could feel the weight of Mark's gaze, boring into the back of his skull. "I told you we shouldn't have come," Mark said, breaking the silence, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. "We don't know what's out there. For all we know, it's a trap, and we're walking straight into it." "We have to try," Eli replied, though even his own words sounded hollow to him now. He hated how uncertain he felt. It felt wrong to doubt himself, but the thought had been creeping up on him ever since the radio transmission. What if they were walking into something worse than just the infected? "I get it," Mark continued, his voice bitter. "But what happens when we find that something?" He spat the word like it tasted sour in his mouth. "What happens when we see what's waiting for us at that hospital? You think they'll just let us walk in? You think they'll be grateful?" Eli opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Catherine's voice cracked through the conversation, sharp and jagged. "I heard something," she said, her eyes wide with panic. "Just now. A noise." Eli's spine stiffened, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up, his hand clenched around the door handle. His mind instantly flooded with all the worst possibilities. The infected were quick. They didn't waste time. If they were being stalked, it would only be a matter of time before. "Catherine, it's just the wind," Sarah said, her voice steady but tight, as though she were trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. "You're just—" "No," Catherine interrupted, her voice rising with a tremor. "No, it's not. It's like footsteps. Heavy ones." The words hit Eli like a punch to the gut. Footsteps? His gaze shot to the rear-view mirror again, but there was nothing. Just the same dark expanse behind them. The same emptiness. The same endless nothing. But then, there it was. A shadow. It was so faint that Eli thought he was imagining it. But for just a second, he saw the outline of something moving. Something tall, something human-shaped. His breath caught in his throat. Was it the figure from before? "Do you see it?" he whispered, his voice shaky as he turned toward Sarah, whose eyes had already shifted to the rear-view mirror. Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "I see it." Mark turned his head sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle he had kept by his side. "What the hell is that?" His voice was low, tense. He was barely holding it together. Eli's heart was pounding in his chest now, his pulse deafening in his ears. "We need to stop. We need to see what it is." "No," Sarah said firmly, her voice like ice. She wasn't even looking at him, her eyes still locked on the road ahead. "We don't stop. We don't give them a chance to surround us. Keep moving." Eli swallowed hard, the fear in his gut twisted, but he couldn't argue with Sarah. She was right. Stopping meant risking getting stuck. Surrounded. If they had learned anything from their time in this new world, it was that vulnerability meant death. But even as they pressed forward, something in the back of his mind refused to let go of what he had seen. The shadow in the distance, fleeting but unmistakable, had felt too real. He had seen enough to know the difference between a trick of the mind and something tangible. And that had been real. The figure was moving closer, just outside the beam of the headlights. It wasn't fast. It wasn't rushing toward them. It was just there, watching. "Who the hell is it?" Mark muttered, shifting in his seat again, his eyes darting back and forth between the rear-view mirror and the front windshield. He was growing more agitated by the second. "It's not a person," Sarah said quietly. "We don't know who or what it is, but it's not a person. Keep driving." "Sarah, we can't just ignore it," Eli began, but she cut off, her voice colder than it had been before. "We are ignoring it, Eli. Just keep your eyes ahead. Trust me." The word sent a chill through him. Eli wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, but a deep, gnawing fear held him back. If Sarah said they should ignore it, then they would. The thing outside, whatever it was, wasn't worth confronting. Not now. But the unease in his chest only grew. He didn't understand why, but deep down, Eli felt like they were heading straight into something they couldn't outrun, something they couldn't see. The hospital loomed ahead like a hollow monument to a forgotten world. Its jagged outline seemed to rise from blackness, an abandoned fortress at the edge of the world. There was no sign of life, no flicker of movement, just the wind rattling through the skeletal remains of broken windows and crumbling walls. The place looked like a tomb. The SUV slowed as they approached the entrance, the headlights casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked asphalt. Eli's stomach twisted as they neared the entrance, a feeling that had only grown stronger since they'd turned onto the hospital grounds. Something wasn't right. The place felt wrong, as though it were holding its breath, waiting. "Stop here," Sarah said abruptly, her voice steady but cold. "We're not going any further in the car." Eli glanced over at her, startled. "Why? We're almost there." "I know," she replied, her gaze flicking toward the hospital's imposing silhouette. "But we can't risk driving into that parking lot. We need to be ready for whatever's inside." A cold lump of dread settled in Eli's chest. He knew Sarah wasn't the type to make decisions lightly. If she said they needed to approach on foot, there had to be a reason. Still, the thought of leaving the safety of the SUV, what little safety it still provided, made him uneasy. "Catherine, Mark, grab the supplies," Sarah ordered, her tone brokering no argument. "Eli, keep an eye out. We don't know who or what might be inside." Mark didn't protest, though there was a sharpness to his movements as he climbed out of the SUV. Catherine, too, was silent, her face pale in the dim light. Eli felt a pang of guilt as he watched her. She was already on edge, and now they were walking into what might very well be a death trap. As the three of them gathered the last of their gear, Eli felt his nerves tighten with every passing second. The silence around them felt too quiet, as though the world had paused to watch. It wasn't just the stillness of the night that unnerved him. It was something deeper, something more primal. "Let's move," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She was already halfway toward the entrance before Eli could even react. The air outside was cool but oppressive. the scent of decay clinging to the shadows. They moved in a loose formation, their steps echoing off the cracked concrete as they made their way toward the hospital's front doors. Each step felt like an eternity. Eli's eyes darted back and forth, scanning the darkness, but all he could see were the towering shapes of abandoned cars and twisted metal. There was no sign of life, no movement. Catherine walked just behind him, her breath shallow, her eyes wide and glassy. She wasn't looking at the hospital. She was looking around them, constantly, nervously, as though she expected something to jump out from the darkness at any moment. "It's too quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her words were sharp, cutting through the stillness. "Where are they? The people who were supposed to be here?" Eli glanced at her, his lips pressed into a thin line. He wanted to say something comforting, something reassuring, but he couldn't. He didn't know if he believed it himself. "Stay close," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "We don't know what we're walking into." They reached the hospital doors, which were half open, darkness spilling from within like ink. The faded letters above the entrance still read St. Jude's Hospital, though the paint was peeling and the words had begun to blur into the wreckage of time. Everything about it screamed abandonment, the echoes of a world that had once been full of life now silenced by whatever had come after. Eli took a deep breath, then nodded to Sarah. "After you." She didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her footfall muffled against the broken tile inside. Mark and Catherine followed closely behind, and Eli took up the rear, trying to steady his breath, trying not to let the fear consume him. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of old rot. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the halls, mingling with the distant, hollow creaks of the building settling into its death. Eli's mind raced with thoughts of what they might find. Would there be survivors? Would they be hostile? Would they be infected? The silence was suffocating. It clung to them, pressing against their skin like a physical weight. They moved down the hallway, the beam from their flashlights flickering with every step. The walls were lined with old, faded posters, patient care reminders, warnings about hygiene, outdated safety protocols. The irony wasn't lost on Eli. Now, the only thing that mattered was survival. They came to a large, double door that led into what had once been the emergency room. Sarah pushed the door open slowly, the creak of hinges loud in the dead air. Inside, the room was a scene of chaos frozen in time. Hospital beds lay overturned, medical equipment scattered across the floor. Bloodstains smeared the walls, a reminder of the violence that had unfolded here long before they arrived. But there were no bodies, no remains, nothing. "They're not here," Catherine murmured, her voice trembling. "They're gone." Eli's throat tightened. "Where were they?" "I told you this was a mistake," Mark muttered, his voice low, laced with frustration and fear. "We shouldn't have come. We shouldn't have." "Shut up," Sarah snapped. Her voice was razor sharp, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the room. "We don't have time for this. We need to keep moving." The tension between them was palpable, thick with the weight of unspoken fears and accusations. Eli's stomach twisted. They were unraveling. All of them. Before anyone could say anything more, a sound echoed down the hallway, a low, guttural moan that froze the blood in Eli's veins. His breath caught in his throat as he swung his flashlight toward the noise, but the beam only danced across the empty corridor. "Did you hear that?" Catherine whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Move," Sarah ordered, her tone urgent. "We've got company." They turned and ran. No time for second-guessing, no time for hesitation. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and Eli's heart pounded in his chest as they rounded the corner. Then they saw it, a figure, lurking in the shadows. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as though it was trying to remember something. Its clothes were tattered, its skin pale and mottled with patches of bruising. It wasn't a survivor. Eli's stomach turned as he raised his rifle, his hand shaking. The figure slowly turned toward them, its eyes glazed and unseeing. And then it opened its mouth and screamed, an inhuman, guttural sound that reverberated through the walls. It wasn't human. They were not alone. The scream shattered the silence, a primal, echoing wail that seemed to hang in the air long after it stopped. The sound didn't feel human. It wasn't anything they had ever heard before, not in this world, not in this new reality. It reverberated through the walls, shaking the very foundation beneath their feet. And for a split second, Eli couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His fingers tightened on the rifle, the cold metal pressing against his sweaty palms. It wasn't human. And that thought, it wasn't human, sent a shiver crawling up his spine. He tried to focus, tried to keep his breathing steady, but his mind was spinning. How many were there? What if this was just the beginning? Sarah didn't hesitate. She turned on her heel, grabbing Catherine by the arm and pulling her toward the door. Get to the back. Now. Catherine didn't resist, but Eli saw the panic in her eyes. He saw the way her legs shook as she stumbled. Like the very act of moving was too much for her to process. She was starting to crack. Mark, on the other hand, was already stepping forward, his hand gripping the rifle tightly as he stared down the hallway. His jaw was set, his eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness. He was ready to fight. But Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him, too. He wasn't just afraid. There was something in his movements that felt calculated, cold. "Eli, let's go," Sarah urged, pulling him toward the door. He nodded, forcing his feet to follow. But his eyes never left the figure. It hadn't moved. Not yet. But Eli knew better than to think it wouldn't. Infected or not, the ones who were left, whether alive or dead, were dangerous. Every one of them was a ticking time bomb. The moment they passed through the door into the hallway, Sarah motioned them toward a stairwell. The group scrambled up the steps, each one moving faster than the last, their feet pounding against the decaying wood and metal with each desperate step. The higher they climbed, the more the silence pressing on them. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thicker and harder to breathe. Eli's chest felt tight, like the very act of inhaling was a laborious effort. But worse than the air was the feeling that they weren't alone. When they reached the second floor, Sarah paused, pushing open a door and ushering them inside. It was a small office, barely larger than a closet. The windows were broken, jagged shards of glass littering the floor, the remnants of a world that had ended long before they arrived. Eli's eyes flicked toward Sarah. She was watching him, studying him. "Sarah," Eli started, his voice low, but the words hung in the air, heavy with suspicion. "What's really going on? What are we doing here?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she motioned for Mark to close the door behind them. The heavy thud of its slamming shut felt final. "Do you feel that?" Sarah's voice was quiet, almost too quiet, as if she was afraid to speak too loudly. "The air's different. The whole place, it feels wrong." Eli nodded, but he wasn't sure if he agreed. He felt it too, but it was more than just the atmosphere of the hospital. There was a coldness creeping between them, a coldness that wasn't just a decay or the lack of light. "What are we doing here?" he repeated, his voice sharper now. "You led us into this place, and I get we're looking for supplies, looking for survivors. But I don't know if I trust the people we're looking for anymore. I don't know if I trust anyone in this hospital." His eyes flicked to Mark and Catherine, who were standing by the window, keeping watch. But he felt their eyes on him, felt the growing distance. "What's your point?" Mark said suddenly, his voice too controlled, too calm. He didn't look at Eli, didn't even move, but his tone was enough to make Eli's skin prickle. Eli took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of Mark's gaze, even though he wasn't looking directly at him. "My point is that we're all afraid. We've been here in this godforsaken place for less than an hour, and already it feels like we're falling apart. And it's not just the infected, it's us. It's all of us." For a moment, no one said anything. The air seemed to thicken with the unsaid words, the accusations hovering just beneath the surface. Finally, Sarah spoke. "You're right. I've seen it too." She glanced at Mark, then at Catherine, as if weighing her next words. "Something's off. About all of us." Eli felt a cold shiver run through him at her admission. He had known, deep down, that something had been slowly rotting beneath the surface. But hearing Sarah say out loud made it real. It made it undeniable. What do you mean? Catherine's voice cracked slightly, but she stepped forward, her wide eyes searching Sarah's face for any kind of explanation. What's off? What are you talking about? I'm talking about... Sarah trailed off, her gaze flickering between the three of them. About trust, about what we become. We're here, fighting for survival, but we're starting to crack. We're starting to change. And it's not just the world around us. It's us.
Eli swallowed. What are you saying, Sarah? I'm saying that the worst enemy isn't just the infected. It's us. It's the fear, the desperation. That's what's going to break us. Mark scoffed, spinning on his heel to face her. You're being paranoid. You've seen it too. It's them. He gestured toward the hallway, where the sound of distant moans seemed to echo through the building. Those things out there, they're the enemy. They're the ones who will kill us. But Sarah's eyes hardened. No, Mark. Will kill us. The room fell silent. The words hung in the air like smoke, suffocating everything else. Eli felt the weight of them settle on his chest, pressing him down into the cold, decaying floor beneath them. The moans from down the hall grew louder. I don't know how much longer we have, Sarah said softly, her eyes never leaving Eli. We can't trust anyone, not even ourselves. The moans outside the office door were relentless, growing louder, closer. With every passing second, each twisted, guttural sound gnawed at Eli's nerves, digging into the cracks that had already begun to form between them. The infected were near, too near. But it wasn't just them Eli had to worry about now. It was the group, the insidious, creeping fear that had settled into their bones was spreading faster than any infection ever could. He could feel it, that presence lurking in the room with them. A pressure, a weight that had nothing to do with the hospital or the infected, but with themselves. He could feel his breath becoming shallow, his palms sweaty. The room, now dim with the light of their dying flashlight, felt suffocating. Sarah, Eli said, his voice shaky but firm. We need to leave, now. She was still staring out the broken window, her back to him, her face shadowed in the dim light. Her posture was rigid, stiff with tension. She hadn't said a word since her last proclamation that the real enemy was themselves, but the weight of it hung heavy between them. It was hard to ignore now. The walls, once familiar, had become prisons, closing in from all sides. I know, Sarah muttered, but her voice was distant, as if she were talking to herself rather than responding to him. Mark, who had been standing near the door, suddenly turned and glanced at Sarah. His eyes were narrowed, his fingers still gripping his rifle tightly. There was a hardness to his gaze, a strange, unsettling coldness that sent a ripple of unease down Eli's spine. For a moment, Mark's eyes flicked to Eli, just a brief moment, but it was enough to send a chill through him. The room felt small now, too small. The four of them were packed together in this tiny space, a corner they couldn't escape from. A trap of their own making. Sarah, this isn't helping, Mark said, his voice clipped, controlled. We need to move. We need to get to the roof, find some kind of escape. If we wait here, we'll be sitting ducks. We're already too exposed. Eli felt a spike of anger at Mark's words. He was right, in a sense, but there was something off about the way Mark said it. It wasn't just the urgency in his voice, it was the intensity. He wasn't just scared, he was something else, and it made Eli's skin crawl. We're not just exposed to the infected, Mark, Sarah snapped, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were hard, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. We're exposed to ourselves. That's what we need to face. Mark didn't flinch. Don't start with this psychological crap, Sarah. The last thing we need right now is your paranoia infecting the group. You've been acting off ever since we got here. Eli's heart skipped a beat at Mark's words. His mouth went dry. He hadn't realized how much Sarah's words had unsettled him, too. But now that Mark had said it out loud, the reality hit him like a truck. There was a fracture in their group, a huge one, and it was impossible to ignore. Catherine, who had been silent up until now, suddenly spoke, her voice small, barely audible over the rising sounds of the infected outside. "Stop it," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously between the others. "Just stop! We don't have time for this! We're not safe here, and we're not going to be safe anywhere if we don't stick together!" Eli opened his mouth to speak, but the words were lodged in his throat. He didn't know what to say. Catherine's words were the truth, but the truth didn't seem to matter anymore. Fear had festered too long. Trust had long since evaporated. "Catherine's right," Eli finally managed, his voice low, strained. "We don't have the luxury of fighting each other. We need to keep moving. We need to get out of here, but we have to be smart about it." For a brief moment, Sarah looked at him. Her gaze softened, just slightly. Then she nodded. "You're right. We need to stick together. But not just physically. We need to trust each other." Eli felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to say something to assure them all, to fix whatever was broken between them. But he couldn't. He didn't know how. A low, scraping noise echoed from the hallway just outside the office. It wasn't a moan this time. It was something worse. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy. The infected were getting closer. They were moving in. "Now," Sarah said, snapping Eli back into reality. She pulled the door open a crack, just enough to peer outside. Her eyes went dark, unreadable. "We move fast, we move quiet, no one makes a sound." Mark pushed past her without hesitation, his rifle at the ready as he slipped into the hallway, quickly followed by Catherine. Eli hesitated, glancing at Sarah one last time before stepping out after them. The hallway was dark, even darker than it had been when they arrived, as if the very air had thickened with something sinister. The low scrape of the infected's footsteps grew louder, closer. And then Eli saw them, a shadow, a figure, looming in the dim light, moving just out of view. Eli felt his heart skip a beat. The figure was human-shaped, but its movements were stiff, jerky, unnatural. It was one of them. The infected. "Quiet," Sarah hissed from up ahead, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't make a sound." They pressed themselves against the wall, holding their breath as the figure moved slowly down the hallway, its head swiveling left and right like it was searching for them. Eli's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of their eyes, their fears, pressing against him. It was almost like the infected weren't the only things they were hiding from. They were hiding from each other, too. The figure passed by them, unaware. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that made every small sound seem magnified. Eli dared not move, not even an inch, afraid that the slightest noise would draw the infected's attention. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah motioned for them to move. They crept down the hallway, their steps light, their eyes scanning every corner, every darkened doorway. Eli was hyper-aware of every sound, the soft shuffle of their feet, the occasional rustle of clothing, the sharp breath of one of them trying to hold it in. The tension was unbearable, suffocating. They reached the stairwell again, the only way up. But as Sarah reached for the door, a sudden noise, a loud crash, echoed from above. It was coming from the roof. A scream, long and drawn out, followed by a low, almost musical sound. Someone or something was up there, and they were waiting for them. The stairwell door creaked open with a sharp groan, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Eli's heart hammered in his chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. His hands were slick with sweat, his mind racing. He wanted to say something, to shout at them all to stop, to think, to wait. But what would it matter? They were already past the point of no return. No one was thinking clearly anymore. Move. Sarah's voice was a sharp whisper, but there was an edge to it, an edge that made Eli's stomach tighten. She had always been the leader, the decision maker. But the cracks were showing now. They were showing in all of them. Sarah, Mark, Catherine, even Eli. As they climbed the last few steps, the sounds of the infected in the building below grew more distant. It was almost a relief. The air suddenly filled with a false sense of safety, the way a storm might lull for a moment before the next wave of destruction crashes in. The door to the roof was cold against Eli's hand, its metal surface biting into his skin. He hesitated for just a second, just long enough to glance back at the others. Catherine was trembling, her hands clutching her rifle so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Mark was already at the door, his body tense, as if he were preparing for something far worse than what they had already encountered. Sarah was last, her face unreadable, but her eyes betrayed her, dark and distant, as though she had already seen something up there that none of them were ready for. "I'll go first," Sarah said, pushing the door open just enough for her to slip through. "Stay low. Don't make a sound. If anything happens..." She trailed off, but the meaning was clear. The moment she stepped through the door, the air shifted. A gust of wind hit them, as if the roof were breathing, releasing the suffocating tension that had clung to them in the stairwell. But it was colder up here, colder than it had been anywhere else. The night sky stretched out above them, vast and empty, no stars, just the black void. Sarah's silhouette moved toward the edge of the roof. She was watching something, waiting. Eli followed her, but his feet felt heavy, like the weight of the building was pulling him down. He caught a glance of Mark, who was close behind, his eyes locked forward, almost too calm, too composed. Eli wanted to call him out, but something kept him silent. Something kept him from wanting to make a sound at all. There was no time for doubts now, no time for second-guessing. If they stayed here for much longer, they were dead. They knew it. The infected were coming. They could hear them downstairs, moaning and shuffling through the halls. Soon they'd be up here, and they'd have nowhere left to run. But the roof offered no sanctuary. Sarah finally reached the edge. She paused, her breath visible in the cold air. She peered down over the side, her face still and hard as stone. "There's a way down," she said, her voice low but clear. "On the north side, a ladder. We can escape, but we need to move now." Eli took a breath and stepped closer. He peered over the edge, trying to see what she saw, but the darkness swallowed everything below. The ladder, the escape. It was all so far away, so uncertain. A part of him wondered if they were already too late. "That's the only way out?" Mark asked, his voice cold, almost mechanical. He was scanning the roof, as if already preparing for a fight. "What if the ladder's blocked? What if it's a trap?" "We don't have time for what-ifs, Mark," Sarah snapped, her sharp gaze swinging to him. "We're running out of options, and we're running out of time. We take the chance, or we die here. Do you want to die here?" Mark's eyes hardened. "I'm not the one who's losing my mind, Sarah. I'm not the one who's..." Sarah didn't let him finish. "Enough!" The tension between them was palpable, thick and heavy. Eli could feel it, see it in their eyes. But there was no time to stop and think. There was no time for anything but survival. A sound broke through. The silence. A single faint moan. Then another. Louder. Closer. They were coming, and they were not alone. Eli's stomach churned as he swung around, his eyes scanning the rooftop, but he saw nothing. No infected, no movement, just the hollow quiet of the night. It was impossible. They should be able to hear them, to see them. By now. "Move!" Sarah hissed again, already heading toward the north side of the roof, her voice sharp as a whip. But something in her tone, something in the way she moved, made Eli hesitate. She was rushing them. She was pushing them too hard, too fast. As they moved toward the ladder, the air grew colder, the wind picking up in quick bursts that made Eli's skin prickle. The moans from below grew louder, and soon they could hear the sounds of shuffling, footsteps on the stairs, coming closer. "There's no time," Sarah said again, her voice tight, strained. She was moving faster now, almost frantic. "We have to go, now!" But Eli didn't move. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the infected. It was her. It was Sarah. Her urgency. Her desperation. It felt wrong. Like she knew something they didn't. Like she was trying to escape something else. Something far worse than the infected. Mark was the first to reach the ladder, and he turned, his hand gripping the rungs. "We're going down now!" Eli's eyes flicked between them. He could feel it. The pressure in his chest. The gnawing sensation at the back of his mind. A warning. A sign. Run. Don't trust them. Don't trust anyone. But it was too late. From the corner of his eye, Eli saw it. A shape. A shadow. Not one of the infected. A figure. It was standing in the far corner of the roof, just barely visible in the shadows. It wasn't moving, but its eyes were locked on them, glowing faintly, like two smoldering embers in the night. Sarah had seen it too. Her face went pale. "Run!" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Eli's mind raced. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. But as he glanced back at the others, Mark already halfway down the ladder, Catherine trembling behind him, he knew. He knew they had no choice. The infected weren't the real threat anymore. The roof was the trap. The figure in the corner of the roof didn't move, at least not immediately, but its presence, its unnatural stillness, was enough to paralyze Eli. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, it was as if the world had come to a halt. Everything around him seemed to fade into the background. The wind, the moans of the infected downstairs, the heavy silence between the others. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heart, its rapid beat, a reminder that he was still alive, still human, for now. The figure, a man, or at least it appeared to be a man, stood in the shadows, just beyond the faint glow of the rooftop's emergency lights. His posture was unnerving, rigid, like a marionette caught mid-motion. Eli couldn't see his face, not fully, but the shape of him was unmistakable. A tall, gaunt silhouette, too thin, too still. Sarah's eyes locked onto the figure, her face paling, the blood draining from her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "Sarah," Eli whispered, the word slipping from his lips before he could stop it. His voice trembled, his feet unwilling to move. "What is that?" Sarah's eyes darted to him, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I don't know," she said, her voice strained. "I don't know, Eli, but we need to go. Now." Mark, still on the ladder, was looking down at them. "What's wrong? Let's go." His voice was tight, impatient. He was already halfway down the ladder. And Catherine, visibly shaking, was one step below him. But Eli couldn't tear his gaze away from the figure. It wasn't moving, not yet. But there was something about it, something unnatural. It felt like the air around them had thickened, like the very presence of this thing was distorting reality. Eli took a cautious step forward, unable to resist the pull. He should have stayed with the group, should have followed them down the ladder. But something inside him was compelling him to move closer to the figure. "Don't," Sarah warned, her voice low and sharp. "Eli, please, don't." He ignored her, his legs moving almost of their own accord, a strange compulsion driving him toward the edge of the roof. The figure's head twitched slightly, as if it sensed him, and Eli froze. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Suddenly, the figure's head jerked upward, and Eli's stomach dropped. The faint light revealed its face, but it was wrong. Too wrong. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight over its skull. Its eyes, huge, too wide, glowed faintly, like the reflection of a distant fire, and they were locked directly on Eli. There was no expression, no emotion, just the endless hollow gaze that seemed to pierce through him, as though it could. See every dark thought, every fear lurking inside. Eli's breath hitched. It wasn't a man. It wasn't human. The figure's lips parted, and a low, guttural sound emanated from its throat, more of a hiss than a voice. It wasn't the sound of words, but the unmistakable sound of something inhuman trying to speak. "Get back!" Sarah's voice was frantic now. She grabbed Eli's arm, yanking him backward with surprising strength, dragging him away from the figure. But Eli couldn't stop staring, his body frozen in terror. "What is that?" he breathed, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," Sarah hissed, her face twisted with panic. "But it's not one of them. It's something else. We need to go. Now." Mark was already off the ladder, standing between them and the creature. He had his rifle raised, his body tense, but Eli could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The fear that had been growing in all of them now boiled over. The figure didn't move. It didn't flinch, didn't react in any way. It just watched. And then, as if realizing its presence alone was enough to paralyze them, it stepped forward. The moment it moved, something snapped inside Eli. The terror that had held him in place shattered, replaced by a visceral need to act. Survive. "Get down the ladder!" Sarah shouted, her voice cracking. She was already moving, pulling at Eli's arm again, but he was rooted to the spot. But Mark was quicker. Without hesitation, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot echoed across the roof, loud and harsh in the night air. The figure didn't even flinch. The bullet hit its chest, and Eli thought he saw something. But it wasn't what he expected. There was no blood, no recoil. The wound didn't even seem to faze the figure. It simply continued to step forward, its eyes fixed on them, its movements deliberate, almost calculating. Eli's stomach turned. His mind raced and panic surged through him. They were not dealing with something human. They were dealing with something far worse. "Run!" Sarah screamed. It was too late to think, too late to question. Eli shoved past her, adrenaline coursing through his veins, his legs moving on their own, heading for the ladder. Catherine was already halfway down, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she tried to climb faster. Mark was still, standing there, rifle raised, but he wasn't firing anymore. He was staring at the figure, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with something that wasn't just fear, something darker, more primal. "Mark!" Eli shouted. "Come on!" But Mark didn't move. His body was stiff, like he was rooted to the ground, and his gaze was locked on the figure, on its eyes. The figure was getting closer, its movements smooth, graceful, like it was gliding toward them, its head tilted at an almost unnatural angle. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as he climbed the ladder faster than he ever had in his life, his hands gripping the rungs so tight his fingers ached. He could hear the others, their panicked breathing, the frantic shuffling of feet as they descended. But his focus was on the figure, the horrible, inhuman thing that was coming for them. It wasn't just an infection they had to fear anymore. It wasn't just the mindless, shambling creatures that had once been human. This was something else, something far worse, and they were about to find out just how far this nightmare went. The ladder rattled as Eli's feet hit the ground, and for a moment he thought he was safe. But the moment the last of his foot reached the earth, the weight of the situation sank in. They were still being hunted. And now, the fear that had been building up inside him for days suddenly felt all-consuming. His breath was ragged, his chest tight with panic. He spun around, eyes wild, looking for the others. Mark had made it down, but he was crouched low, rifle still raised, scanning the rooftop above them, his face pale with shock. "Where's Sarah?" Eli gasped, panic creeping into his voice. Catherine's voice came from below him, hoarse and frantic. She's still up there. She won't move." Eli's stomach turned. Sarah was the one who had led them this far, the one who had always been the steady hand. But now she was frozen on the rooftop, trapped by something far worse than they could understand. "God damn it," Mark muttered, pushing past Eli, his rifle trained on the roof. "We don't have time for this." Eli was about to shout at him to wait, to stop, but then he heard it. The low, unsettling sound that had followed them up the ladder, the faintest scrape of feet against metal. It was the figure. It was coming. "Down after them!" "No!" Eli shouted, his voice hoarse with fear. "We need to get out of here, now!" But it was too late. The figure had reached the top of the ladder, its pale, inhuman face peering over the edge. Its eyes, those wide, hollow eyes, locked onto Eli with a chilling intensity, as though it had already claimed him as its prey. It was hunting them, all of them, and there was no escape. Eli felt his limbs go cold, his mind racing for some kind of solution, some way out. But as he turned back to the ladder, his heart sank. The figure was already moving down toward them. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as though it was savoring the terror it caused. Its eyes never left him, never blinked. It wasn't just following them, it was watching them. "We can't outrun it," Catherine's voice cracked. She was, trembling, her eyes wide with fear, but there was something else in her gaze. It wasn't just terror, it was confusion, disbelief, as though she couldn't understand how something like this could exist. Eli grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the street, but she fought him off. "No! It's not just chasing us. It's toying with us. It wants us to feel this fear." Mark's voice cut through the chaos. "We can't think about that right now. We need to keep moving." "Where?" Eli shouted, his voice rising, in frustration. "Where do we go? Where do we hide from that thing?" The figure was almost at the bottom of the ladder now, its head tilting at an impossible angle. It wasn't human. It was something else. Something that fed on fear. Eli's mind began to race. Was that it? Was the creature feeding on their fear? The way it moved so slowly, deliberately, as though it knew the terror it inspired would make them falter, to trap them. The roof was no longer an escape. It had been a trap from the beginning, and the ladder was no better. They were all stuck in a nightmare that only got worse the longer they stayed. But as they turned to run, it wasn't the ladder or the rooftop that stopped them. It was a sound, an inhuman screech, one that echoed deep in their bones. It wasn't the figure, but something else, something more. Out of the corner of his eye, Eli saw the infected, dozens of them, pouring into the alleyway from every direction. They were coming for them. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, their moans more frantic as they too began to encircle the group. The infected weren't the only threat anymore, they were completely surrounded. "We need to get inside," Mark yelled, pulling Eli away from the edge of the street. "Now!" But it was too late. The infected were already too close. Eli could hear them shuffling behind him, their groans growing louder, closer. "We're trapped," Catherine whispered, almost as if to herself. Her face was twisted with despair. There's nowhere to go. And then the figure stepped down from the ladder, its long skeletal fingers brushing against the asphalt as it descended with eerie grace, its hollow eyes still locked on them. It moved toward them, its gait almost calm, deliberate. Eli could feel the panic rising, suffocating him. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to escape, to do anything to avoid this thing. But the figure wasn't just chasing them. It was orchestrating this, pulling them into its game. It wanted them to fear it. For a moment, everything went still. The infected, once so close, now stood frozen in place, their heads turned toward the figure. They weren't attacking. They were waiting, watching. Then, as if on cue, the figure raised its hand slowly, the gesture so deliberate that Eli almost didn't believe it. And just like that, the infected began to move, but not at them. No. The infected began moving toward the figure. They stumbled forward, reaching out with their decaying hands, drawn to it as if they were compelled by some unseen force. Their growls filled the air as they closed in on the entity, their eyes dull and hungry. Eli's mind couldn't process what he was seeing. The infected, who had been mindlessly hunting them just moments ago, were now obeying the figure. This isn't real, Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible, her face pale with shock. This isn't happening. But it was happening. The figure didn't just control the infected, it controlled them. And in that moment, Eli understood the true horror of what they were facing. The creature wasn't just a predator, it was a puppeteer, a master of fear. It made the infected its minions, its tools, and now they were the ones trapped in its web. "Run!" Sarah screamed, but it was already too late. The air was thick with terror. The figure, the Watcher, moved through the infected with a chilling calmness, as though it were their master. The infected didn't even hesitate. Their decayed hands reached out, their vacant eyes locked onto the creature, drawn by some unseen force, some magnetic pull. Eli's heart pounded in his chest, his breath ragged and sharp. The fear that had been mounting inside him for days finally came to a head. He could feel his sanity starting to unravel, the walls of reality crumbling around him. "We can't outrun it," Catherine's voice cracked, panic seeping through her words. "There's no way out." Mark, who had once been so confident, now seemed lost. His rifle hung limply at his side. "I don't understand. It's like it's controlling them, all of them." The Watcher didn't seem to care about them anymore. It was as though they were nothing more than an afterthought, a mere backdrop to the horrors unfolding before them. The infected, once driven by hunger and instinct, were now nothing more than puppets, mindless servants to this creature, this entity that seemed to exist outside the boundaries of what they understood. Eli's gaze snapped to Sarah. She stood there, frozen, her wide eyes locked on the Watcher, her face ashen with fear. She had always been the leader, the one who kept them together, the one who made decisions. But now she was as lost as the rest of them. "Sarah," Eli shouted, his voice breaking through the suffocating silence. "We need to get out. Of here. Now!" But she didn't respond. Her eyes were distant, unblinking, as though she were in a trance, captivated by the Watcher's gaze. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The Watcher raised its hand, and the infected, in a synchronized movement, began to move closer to it, forming a circle around it as if waiting for its next command. "It wants us to stay," Mark muttered, his voice low, trembling. "It's drawing us in. It's controlling us just like it's controlling them." Eli's blood ran cold. His mind raced with frantic thoughts, each one more desperate than the last. How do you escape something like this? How do you escape a creature that controls not just your body, but your very thoughts? He had no answers, no solutions. All he knew was that they were running out of time. Suddenly, the watcher turned its gaze back to them. Eli felt it, like a weight pressing down on his chest, a suffocating force that crushed the air from his lungs. It was looking at him. It was looking inside him. "Don't look at it," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. "It knows you. It knows all of us." The words sent a chill through Eli's spine. "It knows you." What did that mean? Was it reading their minds? Was it feeding on their fears, their doubts? Without thinking, Eli took a step back, away from the creature. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get as far away as possible. He didn't care about anything else anymore. He didn't care about Sarah's trance-like state or Mark's inability to fight back. He only cared about survival. But the Watcher's gaze never left him. It wasn't just a physical presence, it was mental too. It was inside his head. I can't think," Eli muttered, his voice cracking. His mind felt like it was being shredded, each thought slipping away, replaced by a paralyzing dread. His limbs felt heavy, as if the Watcher was dragging him back toward it. "No! Fight it!" Sarah's voice was clearer now, desperate. She was shaking, as though she was waking up from a nightmare. "Eli, you have to fight it. We have to fight." "But how? How do you fight something that knows you better than you know yourself?" The infected were getting closer, but they no longer mattered. They weren't the threat anymore. The real threat stood before them. A being beyond comprehension, beyond anything they could fight or outrun. And then it happened. The Watcher's mouth opened wide, and a sound, no, a scream, ripped through the air. It wasn't a scream of pain or rage. It was something darker, something ancient. The infected stopped moving, their heads tilting in unison, their eyes glowing with a strange, unnatural light. It was as though the Watcher had commanded them to stop everything, to freeze, and they obeyed. The sound it made was more like a low, resonant hum that vibrated in the air, in their bones. It wasn't a voice, it was a force. And then Eli understood. The Watcher wasn't just feeding off their fear. It was their fear. It was the embodiment of every nightmare, every doubt, every horror they had ever experienced, manifested into flesh, a creature that could make reality bend to its will. It wasn't controlling the infected. It was controlling them. It was controlling reality itself. Eli's vision began to blur. The world around him flickered, no, shifted. His mind screamed for him to fight, to keep his focus, but he couldn't. It was too powerful. And then, the ground beneath him shifted. He wasn't standing in the alley anymore. The buildings, the sky, the streets, everything around him was gone. Instead, he was in a vast black void, an empty expanse that stretched out infinitely. The Watcher stood before him, its eyes glowing, pulling him in like a magnet. "You will never escape me," it whispered, though the words weren't spoken aloud. They were in his mind, in his soul, buried deep inside him. The last thing Eli saw before everything went black was Sarah's face, twisted in terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. And then, nothing. If you've made it this far into the darkness, you know the horrors don't always come in the form of monsters. Sometimes it's the things we can't see, the fears we can't escape, that haunt us the most. But remember, you're not alone in this. You've found your way here, to the silent horror. And this is just the beginning. If you're ready to face the things that go bump in the night, the nightmares that lurk just beyond the edge of your mind, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Stay close, because the silence is about to get much louder, and the horror, well, it's only just begun.